Hey, Lisa.
Hey,
Good to see you.
yeah, it's good to see you as well.
Yeah. We were a little bit overdue for a new episode of Art of Practice. We took last month off, which was okay because I think we were just completely inundated with a whole lot of activities back then. But it's really nice to pick up the thread with you.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. And we get to have Nomali here today, so
One
it's
of my absolute favorite people in the galaxy.
Woohoo!
No, Molly. How you doing?
I'm good. It's nice to be with you both. Thank
Oh,
you.
it's
Thank
so
you for
awesome to
having
have
me
you.
over. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I was saying to you in chat before the show, I've been seeing a lot more of you on my screen these days, and I love it. I love that you've been
Cool.
able to do these shows with us, and of course, you lead this entire series, a very diverse series of practice sessions on our Integral Life Practice platform, which we will talk about today, as well as a very special Mother's Day practice,
Mm.
which we're actually going to be doing on the day before Mother's Day, on Saturday morning, I believe. And I will let you and Lisa actually talk about that.
Okay.
yeah, actually I'm just I loved the idea that you came up with for that session, and I'd love to hear more about your inspiration for that, and also just a little bit about, if you want to tell the audience about what you're going to be doing. It
Mm.
sounds super juicy. So yeah.
Yeah, it really does.
Yeah. So I think I was just a little bit surprised when Integral Life, when the two of you, or maybe it was just Lisa, who mentioned that there was going to be a Mother's Day theme, which was like, oh, that's really lovely. So my session is, I don't have all of the details completely ironed out yet because it's all sort of percolating in my mind, and things kind of are being created up until I begin the call often, and sometimes it is while I'm on the call. um, but what I realize always is that just the role of the mother is a it's beautiful, difficult, complex, compassionate. It's a role that is all all of it. It's like the primary relationship in our lives
Hmm.
for most of us. And obviously there's some of us who don't have that, or it comes to us in different forms. So I myself am not a woman who has given birth to a child, so I'm not a sort of a biological mother. I have a very wonderful relationship with my own mother. It's really sweet. She and I have actually been together throughout this whole pandemic.
Oh,
And sometimes it's, I come from Sri Lanka, so I come from a different culture to some degree, and from, in some ways, that Asian relationship to in Asian family relationships are just really different to American family relationships. In Sri Lanka, growing up in a Buddhist household, we were told from a very young age that your Buddha at home is your mother. So we kind of grow up with a sense of reverence,
Wow.
towards our mother, especially, but also our father. It's like our parents are a really big deal in how we are raised, and for children growing up in Sri Lanka. So to me, the mother-daughter relationship has been really easy. It's been really just simple. We enjoy just simple things and watching movies together, and it's never been like heavy laden with the kind of energy and the relationship dynamics that I've come to see here.
hmm.
For a lot of people, relationships between children and parents can be pretty complex.
Mm.
So I want to explore in this practice not just our relationship to our mother. I'm calling it the 3-2-1 of mother, because there's a mother out there. However way we define a mother figure, a mother role, somewhere out there for us. It could be an actual kind of traditional, yes, the mother who gave birth to oneself. whoever that is, and then to have a dialogue with that, and then to turn it to the mother that is within us, whatever we have given birth to. Because I really believe that all of us, even if we haven't like biologically given birth to a child, we mother other things. We mother pets. So for some of us, we mother projects, we mother friendships, relationships, we mother communities, we mother the earth, the planet. So in many ways, regardless of gender, regardless of whether you are a biological mother, um, I think we all have that great mother love, the feminine love, the relational love. It's all in us and it's complex. And so I'm gonna sort of really explore that.
Beautiful. No, that's a beautiful summary, Nomali, and I really particularly appreciate how you're focusing this practice. I mean, it seems like it's got many different applications.
Mhm,
You're going to be speaking to, particular relationships that someone might have with their own mother or with their own children, for example.
mhm, mhm,
And you're also, sort of taking an archetypal approach to this, which I think is really interesting, and speaking to that sort of the symbolism of motherhood that all of
mhm.
us, men and women, carry around with us and sort of continue to co-create and redefine every time we enact it. So I think that's going to be really, really beautiful and really, really powerful for our audience.
I hope so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's always the hope, right?
Yeah.
Unless you just completely screw it up, and then we all,
Yeah,
need some Freudian therapy and sit in the couch and
absolutely.
talk
Yes.
about our moms.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, it is a complex topic. So I want to honor that,
Yeah.
and not simplify it too much.
Mhm.
And um I also want to, I don't know if any of you have heard of the Huffman process.
No,
The
say more about it.
the Huffman process is a 7-day retreat that happens out of California in White Sulphur Springs. It's close to Napa. And the whole purpose of the Huffman process is really in some ways uh, to connect with your relationship with your parents.
Mm.
Mm.
So it's really powerful. There's a lot of psychotherapy that happens in there, although it's not necessarily a psychotherapy retreat. Um, they're highly established. They have been doing this for 50 years or so, 40, 50 years or so. So they're a very highly established organization. Very unfortunately, their entire retreat center was burnt down in the recent fires in California. But I did that, and um, it's like there were some people who showed up to that retreat who have never known a parent.
Mm.
So the work that we do around our primary relationship,
Mhm.
whether we even knew it or not, has played such a significant role in who we are today.
Yes.
So I think there's beauty in exploring that. So I want to say thank you for inviting me to do that and for thinking of doing something for Mother's Day. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
Beautiful.
So Nomali and I know each other through our integral coaching days. We went to Integral Coaching Canada together and met there, which was really wonderful. And getting to be part of that group with you, Nomali, was super special. And
Likewise.
and so as integral coaches, we have a particular way of approaching practice that we do with our clients that I think probably also largely informs how we approach practice for the ILP platform and for the participants, that are coming through Integral Life. And so what's been interesting that I've been able to just kind of see over time as that platform has evolved and as practice leaders have been, kind of jumping onto that platform and offering different things, is that you and I tend to offer like a lot of different things, right. Whereas some practice leaders, they really drop deep into a single practice. And I'd love to hear sort of your approach to practice, as well as, maybe you could highlight some of the practices that you are currently bringing to the platform, and sort of the way that you approach putting those practices together, like why they're alive for you.
Yeah, big question. So first, to start with, what's my approach to practice? I don't know that I necessarily have a thing called this is my approach. I suppose I'm drawn to certain practices in a different way. Probably I'm always trying to make a bit of a heart connection. I think my practice just comes to it. To me, it's meaningful if it touches my heart somehow. So in that way, perhaps the practices that I design, perhaps the practices that I introduce to my coaching clients or in our practice sessions are maybe softer in some ways, or it's more heart-centered. And I think I'm also a depth freak a little bit. So I do like to go into like deeper areas, but it's still sort of heart-centered. And at the same time, I'm an Enneagram 4 with a really strong Enneagram 5 wing. So
Same.
Yeah.
That's
yeah. So I just feel like I can do heart and head really easily sometimes. So I go to both spaces because some of my practices are also, not so much about reflection, but it's more about the sort of reflection from that heart-centered place. But sometimes my practices are also like, let's practice the heady space, because I love that too. So, like recently, I played a video of the video that made Jordan Peterson popular. Jordan Peterson was giving a speech at University of Toronto, and the students sort of ambushed that meeting, and then they got on a fight, and well, not a fist fight, but a physical fight, but they were really got into a very heated argument. And that's what really got Jordan Peterson out kind of known. So I played like a 7-minute video of that argument. And what I wanted everyone to do then was to send them into different groups. And I had them come up with, I laid a bunch of questions, and I had them sort of think of ways that as integralists, how do we honor both of those sides? How do we honor Jordan Peterson as well as the students who hate Jordan Peterson? So they kind of hate each other. So I think these kinds of practices aren't terribly heartful, so to say. They're a little bit more headful. But I think I take a lot of joy in sort of bringing that head-heart approach to my practice. And wherever I can, for sure, I will bring the physical piece as well. There's just no way that the body is not a part of that whole inquiry. So whether it's a simple physical practice, just to even sort of stand up and notice the body, or, just connect with the body as we bow, just little simple things like that. We're limited as far as the physicality is concerned to really feel it as the body of the Sangha. We're a little limited in that space through Zoom. But so I think, just simply from an Enneagram perspective, I could perhaps say that my practices come from the approach of trying to integrate or trying to include as much as is possible of the head center, the heart center, and the gut center. So
I love that. I love that because I really resonate with that. I mean, you and it's one of the reasons why you and I have always gotten along as well as we do is that we, I think, approach this, we enact integral in very similar ways.
mm,
Because we share that aspect of a cosmic address together. I'm also a type 4 who leans pretty heavily on my 5 wing, which
mm,
means, like you, I absolutely love the intellectual stuff. I love the cognitive. I mean, it's what brought me into the game in the first place. But I
mhm,
noticed that I don't feel satisfied unless I'm able to create some sort of connective tissue between all of that big, brilliant, those ideas that are floating around up there, and really kind of anchoring it in the heart, making it so that this is driving an actual passion and is actually, capable of transforming not just how we think about these things, but how we relate to them in the moment as reality arises. For us each and every day.
mm,
And I think that that's a really, really powerful move. And, to me, I sort of have this shorthand that I've been using when I think about, where integral is today and where I think it's going to be going tomorrow. And I think that until now, for decades, really, integral really has been very cognitively driven, which makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, this is coming from Ken Wilber's cosmic address, and the dude is just absolutely phenomenally brilliant and has gifted us with this, intellectual crown jewel of his work. And now it's up to us in this sort of next wave to, like I said, create the connective tissue and really help people bring that energy out of sort of the imaginal and into their physical being, into their bodies and into their hearts and into their practices and their behaviors and just how we move through the world. And to me, it's sort of representative of, it took a whole lot of eros in a certain kind of way to bring us to where we are today. But I believe in my heart that the next phase of integral, where this sort of spills out into the rest of the world, is going to require a more agape like approach. It's
mhm,
going to require sort of an integral feminine, I think, that is really capable of pulling this down and making it immediately relevant and really emphasizing not just the true, right, but also the goodness that integral makes possible, that we're able to channel through our lives and into the world, in order to, leave this place a little bit brighter than we found it.
mhm.
And I love that impulse, and I've seen that exact impulse in you ever since I first met you, which was what, like 20 years ago.
I know, yeah. Incredible. Well,
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it's the work that we are all probably doing. And I think as far as the practices go, um, it's the first time that Integral Life has done anything like this, right? Like opening it up for practice together. So, yeah,
Particularly
wonderful.
this sort of ground up approach. I mean, we've done things like ILP kits and you put it in a box and it's all kind of, a little bit stodgy feeling. Um,
Seminars and yeah,
Yeah, sort of
yeah.
the practice soapbox. This is a different
Mhm.
approach that we're doing, which is, definitely bringing up a lot more. I think we realize at the end of the day, look, our audience 9 times out of 10 is so much smarter and more realized than we are. Let's let them drive this thing, right?
Cool. Yeah. So Lisa, I don't know if I completely answered. You had several questions in your question, and I don't know if I got to all of it. I think yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, it was actually good. And I want to pick up the thread that Cora was just speaking to. In this particular podcast, we've been talking about the art of practice and the importance of practice. And it was funny. I was actually on a call just the other day with Kevin Snorf, who is another one of our practice leaders, and also an integral coach, who went through this at the same time that Nomali and I did. And you know, what he was saying is that he thinks that sometimes it's difficult for people to really make the connection of like why practice is so important. And in particular, why integral practice is so important, because it just seems like it can be, you know, all of these different practices that you should be doing. And then, you know, and then Ken says it's a good idea to do integral practice, but like, what is the through line? What is the, you know, what is this actually allowing for? What is the value of integral life practice? And I'm curious if you have, if that sparks anything for you, if you have anything to say about that.
About like the importance of practice.
Yeah, and the value specifically of like integral, you know, of doing an integral practice, right? Of something that's more broad than a specific practice over.
Yeah. Well, any practice at all, I think, is important just for the mere fact that that's where we get to come out of the laboratory of the mind and just like roll up our sleeves and actually try things. And the more we do that, the more, and I think that in some ways we have to be real frank with ourselves when we practice, so that we allow for our, you know, vulnerability to come out. It's when we practice, we see that as we get good at something, to get good at something, we have to practice. And while we are practicing, we see all the ways in which we stumble, we make mistakes, we see how much more we have to go, or how much we can relax, because also we realize we're doing fine. We're just okay. We're doing great. So to do is to become more enlightened, I think. To me, it can be really difficult because I'm really happy sometimes to just stay in my heart and stay in my head and not really do. So it just, and for some people, it's really easy for them to do, but then they really struggle with sort of connecting more to the heart, or connecting more, sort of being able to think critically, for example. So it's somehow all of these different ways of waking up, growing up, showing up, cleaning up. I don't know where I got this from, but I'm also adding resting up to that.
Resting up. I like that. Yeah.
So it's I think the reason why we want to practice is, and hopefully practice with community, is to actually allow for our humanity to come out through our practice, because otherwise we are armored and quite protected, self-protected, and we think we've got it all, we think that we're good. And when we actually go out there and we do it, we learn more about ways in which we are already fine, we can relax, our anxiety has a chance to take a nap, and other ways of being more humble and realizing, wow, I got some ways to go here.
I like resting up a lot. I think it's funny that we can anyone we invite into this conversation can probably provide their own unique up to add to the list. You know, Diane Hamilton's is shutting up. Wake up, grow up, clean up, shut up. Which I appreciate. Well, I've got a question actually for both of you, since both of you have this coaching background. In your experience, what actually prevents people from practicing? And I ask because I think that most people here in Integral Land have a voice in the back of our heads that says, dude, you should really be practicing. And yet so many of us don't. It's really hard for whatever reason to overcome the resistance that is sort of preventing us from sitting on a cushion or lifting those weights, or, you know, joining these daily practice sessions that we're doing. What do you guys think is the actual resistance that is sort of keeping people from showing up when, you know, there's probably a voice somewhere in the background telling them that they should?
Lisa, you want to go? Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, naming it resistance really is the core thing, right? I think the resistance can show up in a variety of ways, and it can show up as fear, and it can show up as you know, complacency. It can show up as anything. But I think that, you know, I mean, in psychology, what we know is that it takes a lot for people to actually change anything. And generally speaking, it can take a lot of pain for people to actually want to make any change. It's comfortable being comfortable, right? Like it's a lot easier to stay where you are. When you begin to get into places where you're unfamiliar, when you start to stretch beyond that comfort zone and you start to practice with things that you have to employ beginner mind, or that you have to be humble, as Nomali was talking about, or you have to drop in and be more present and more heart-centered. All of those things bring up, and vulnerable, all those things bring up different aspects of us that we may not come into contact with on a normal basis. So it becomes very uncomfortable very fast. Or it can be. We get to meet ourselves in different ways that through practice that we are not used to meeting ourselves. That can feel daunting. And so, you know, the practice itself, the reason why I think it's so important is because the practice itself can create a support structure, can actually hold you as you start to foray into this unknown area. What I particularly like about the way that we're doing it through Integral Life right now is that you get to do that in community. Now, I know that for some people who identify as extreme introverts, that may also sound daunting, but the truth of it is that there's something to be said about being in a group of people where we're all uncomfortable, where we're all trying something new together, where we are all bridging beyond our, you know, what is known for us, that we're all venturing into that vulnerable and humble territory together. That I think actually supports. It can be also an added real support structure in calling you forward out of that comfort zone. So that's what popped up for me.
That's beautiful. What do you think, Nomali?
Yeah, love it, Lisa. It was just your reflections are beautiful and brilliant. Kind of sort of writing, piggybacking on what Lisa was just sort of saying. If I were to sort of take it even a layer deeper, I think, to me, what practice sometimes shines a light on is death, in a certain way, you know, death of um death of who we think we are. And I think we are predisposed, we come into this world holding on to life as we know it somehow, and trying every way possible to deny death, as though it's never really going to happen. And I think the more we practice, and this is where I think any kind of practice is brilliant for any person at any stage of development, at any life condition that they're faced with. So having something that they routinely do is beautiful, no matter what, who. But with an integral practice, or with a little bit more of a deeper enlightenment that we can bring to our practice, I think what we more and more touch is that sort of, that this life is finite to some degree, this life that we think we are living, and this body that we think we have. And I think there's a lot of fear that comes up when we really open ourselves up to practice. That sense of the dissolving of the felt sense of reality, and the lack of it in some ways. So I think that there is a beautiful dissolving of this relative life that all of us humans, pretty much, I am scared to lose in a way. It's almost like if I don't have this contracted ego life, ego self, then it's almost like, oh my God, I don't exist. So anything that creates a liberation from that is actually scary.
Good Lord, that's a gorgeous, that's a gorgeous response.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think you're really onto something there. And I think what that shows to me is that, you know, having a cognitive relationship with these integral ideas isn't enough to
Mhm.
endure that. It's not
Mhm.
enough to endure that. It actually requires a certain amount of, well, humility to be willing to walk into that sort of vulnerability, right? But there's also a sort of an ego maturity, it seems like. And I
Mhm.
think that, you know, one of the things that I think we often see is that people's cognitive development often outpaces, sometimes far outpaces, the development of sort of their other intelligences, including their ego development. So I think there's a lot of people who are really, really keyed into the integral ideas, but ironically are sort of using those ideas as, you know, Ken talks about immortality projects, where we
Mhm.
sort of find these substitute gratifications for this sense of, you know, finitude, for the sense that like I have a finite existence. I need to find something bigger than just this body mind I can attach my identity to, so that, you know, if I can't survive death, at least that can.
Mhm.
And, you know, oftentimes it feels like integral ideas, even though the ideas themselves are kind of telling you to check that out, maybe, you know what I mean? We're still sort of using these ideas as an edifice,
Yeah.
in order to sort of try to survive something, in order to have, you know, sort of greater reach and a greater immortality in a certain kind of way. And, you know,
Mhm.
in my own experiences with practices, one of the things that I've noticed is, you know, it goes back to how I originally framed the question. There's always that voice that says you should be doing this, you should be doing that. All right, you should be, you know, hopping on your elliptical machine every day, you should be meditating every day. There's always these shoulds, but it feels like, you know, we often, among our staff, talk about the principles of like authentic marketing. And one of the angles I take on authentic marketing is there's a difference between a vitamin and a painkiller. And we all know that we should be taking our vitamins, but very few of us do, right? Because we don't actually feel the benefit of taking that vitamin until some pain is alleviated somewhere, right? I mean, there's a certain aspect of our nervous system that's just sort of, we want the quick fix. We just want the quick fix, or at least we want some sort of symptom relief. And I think that as we begin to relate to integral life practice, not just as like take your vitamins, eat your broccoli, do your exercises, right? But it's actually like, if you do this, here is a pain that is actually going to loosen up. Here's a knot that's going to slowly uncoil for you, and that is going to reduce suffering in your life. But the problem is sometimes it takes, you know, you got to take your vitamins for a while before you start to feel the benefits of that. I mean, I remember years ago when I was a young man doing P90X. It sucked. It really sucked. And like I had to drag myself to do it every single day. And it was just this voice telling me, you should do this. This is what you should be doing. You've committed to this, show up. It wasn't until I was like 3 months into the process and I really started feeling the benefits, which always comes later, right? That always comes later when you feel sort of the payoff of all this work that you've been doing. But once you get that feedback loop, it keeps you going,
Mhm.
right? And I feel like we're at the phase in our integral life practice platform where a lot of people who've been participating with it regularly over the last year are feeling those painkillers. They're actually feeling in an immediate way how this is, again, reducing suffering for them in some aspect of their lives. And I think the more we can lead with that and help remind people, like, you know, don't do this because we're telling you to do this. Do this because it's going to make you feel better, right? You're going to be happy. You're going to have more access to all of your capacities and capabilities and potentials. You're going to be able to see those opportunities. You're going to be able to work with Lisa in order to further develop your own anti-fragile mind so that you can continue to step into this even more deeply. I think if we can do a better job of getting that message out, um, you know, we'll really start to see this thing bear more fruit.
Yeah. Yeah.
What I love about this piece that you brought in, Nomali, is that ultimately it's this this underlying fear of death, right? This underlying fear of ego death and also physical death. Um, that really all of these practices on some level are allowing you to become more comfortable with. And so it's like, as we practice in small ways, taking those dissolving steps, in small ways, letting go of aspects or beliefs or patterns, in small ways of becoming more comfortable with crisis and change. As we take these steps, as we practice these together, what's happening ultimately is we are becoming more comfortable with the inevitability of our own death. And I think that that's, in terms of, so yes, that's the underlying resistance. It's also the underlying brilliant outcome, or the what's possible as a result of the practice, of being in practice, is being able to make friends with that aspect of our existence.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's. I was just thinking as I was hearing you both. Why is practice so difficult? Was the question that Corey had posed, and in some ways, practice is difficult because it is. If you practice, it is a reminder of our immortality. But also, that is such a bad way to sell practice. Like, practice because then
100% immortality guaranteed.
right, like when you learn to die on the cushion, then someday you don't have to die, like when Ken said,
If you die before you die, then when you die, you won't die.
You won't die. Yeah, not a good tagline.
Yeah, it's a tough one. It's tough to fill a room.
Like, learn to die. Here, use this practice, do it every day, because then you will learn to die.
I gotta say, Nomali, we have a course which I encourage people to check out on integrallife.com. It's called "Okay, I'm Dead. Now What?" And it's a course with Andrew Holacek, where he's basically giving
cool.
end of life lessons and wisdoms.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful course, but I actually took it as a challenge. I said, I want to write a piece of marketing copy that literally begins with the line, "You are going to die someday."
Yeah.
And that's what we did, and it worked, and people enjoyed it. So I mean, there are clearly some people out there who have enough anti-fragility to simply accept their own mortality and their own limitations.
Yeah.
Right. And then, sign up for this course so that they can learn how to be immortal. Right.
Yeah. So I actually want to take an Enneagram 3 spin now.
Love it.
And I would say that, in fact, even though I love hanging out in the death space because I have a strong 4 wing, what my Enneagram 3 wants to say about this is that really what we're talking about here is a sense of freedom.
Yeah.
Right? We're talking about a sense of freedom, because if we are no longer locked in our identities in such a strong way, what we have access to is, as Corey was talking about earlier, it's a greater sense of freedom. We have the ability to take advantage of more possibilities because we actually see them. We get to be more fluid and flexible in our identity. We get to take on and actually play with who we are becoming in life, and all of that, to me, really is enticing. If this truly is, if all of this ultimately ends up being an illusion, then that means it's a playground. And so I think there's a strong invitation to play. And the thing that keeps us from playing is that we take ourselves so seriously, that we are attached to our traumas and scars, that we don't want to let them go, that we are attached to our identities in very specific ways. And because we're afraid to let those things go, we don't get to be what we can be in this life. So yeah, that's again, I said the Enneagram 3 sort of take on this.
No, I love that.
That's why we need Enneagram 3s.
Seriously, I'm loving this polarity that we're seeing between the threes and the fours, where the threes
Yeah.
are like these life-affirming cheerleaders, and then
Yeah.
us four are like the goth kids who are just all morbid and like it's about death, man.
I know, bring on the depth. So
Yeah, which I'm
deep.
gonna say, which is why, interestingly, the 3-4 or 4-3 is also known as like the most conflicted type, because we've got both living inside of us.
Right. I want to
Yeah,
die so I can live. Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
that's great.
yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, and the other one is I want to live so that I can die.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Right? That's the four.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
funny.
I'm curious, well, just to mention the fact that, speaking of sort of that ego, self, um, practice, just like anything else we want to be really alert to and aware of, is also something that we can also use as a crutch sometimes.
Hmm.
That, for some people, it's amazing that they run, their 6 miles every day and they're super fit and all that. And then they could be in a really abusive marriage at home.
Hmm.
So sometimes even our practice is that which we attach to not really pay attention to the other parts of our lives that needs attention or
That's
needs a different practice.
that's a great point, Nomali. And I think that we see the same thing with spirituality too. And I think
Yeah.
what happens is, it feels to me anyway, like there's sort of a step-by-step process where, when we first start getting into this stuff, when we first start really recognizing our own the spiritual aspect of ourselves, we kind of hold it a little bit separate. Like, okay, that's over. I'm all my spirituality is in this bucket over here, and then I've got the rest of my life sort of over here. And the hope is, it's sort of like learning music. The hope is that you are specifically sectioning out some time to learn your scales and sort of practice what you need to practice, so that eventually you can just always be making music wherever you are, whatever you're doing. So you practice as sort of its own, within its own container, so that eventually you're sort of always practicing, right? You're kind of always, you do enough shadow work, right, until the point where you're always doing shadow work, where there's something sort of in the back of your mind that's constantly processing in this way because you're so practiced at it. And there's a certain point where it takes a lot of intentionality to get ourselves into that practice space, but there's a point, it feels like a point of maturation maybe, where you can kind of start letting go. And that doesn't mean you're going to stop sitting on your cushion, you're going to stop lifting the weights, but it just means like the drive, this sort of ascending, I need to do this in order to get myself from point A to point B, that sort of dissolves a little bit, right? And then you begin actually practicing, you start doing practice not as a way to get somewhere, but as a natural expression of where you already are.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I remember back in the day, and I really mourn the loss of that sitting practice that I used to have. I sit, but not nearly as much as I used to. Um, in Sri Lanka, before moving to the US, I sat the 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. sit at a nearby monastery every day, like a prayer, for many
Mm-hmm.
years. And then there 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. Sit as well. So I'd work during the middle of the day, then the morning and evening, my day was framed with these deep sits. And I remember, this is connected to what you said, when you have that kind of a disciplined practice, and the practice could be anything, I think. I remember just the way in which I would clean my office or write notes to people or do my groceries or do any of it. I remember just feeling so intentional in all of
Mm-hmm.
it. So it's like the frame for the day created so much more meaning, groundedness, beauty to just little things that I remember. This it was there was a diligence and a carefulness with which everything was attended to.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the kind of beauty that comes from a beautiful practice. And then when that practice is actually taking us into a deeper hole, hopefully we're mature enough to realize that we're doing our shadow work. That's
right.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's like practice can actually become a coping mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah. I like I love what you were just saying, Nomali, about sort of the way that the practice that you were involved in were sort of bookends to your day and how that informed the rest of your day. I've never been that much of a meditator. I've never had a practice like that. I do sit, but it's never been to that degree. My approach has mostly been to actually view practice as that I have a couple of practices that I am engaged in, and that as life is happening, and as life is unfolding in the way that life unfolds, that I'm engaged in those practices as a commitment to whatever I am facing in the current moment. And so for me, it's been much more of a sort of dynamic lived experience in that way, that has served me well.
Mm.
But I love, I'm also, I've always been sort of a little bit envious of people who have like a really strong sitting practice, or I've just never developed. That's never been the way that I have really worked with practice in my own life.
Yeah. My life is too messy for that kind of structure. I often say my practice is a practice of wei wu wei with an extra helping of woo. So that means I do nothing at all because I think I'm already there.
That's great.
My introduction to sitting practice was a really strange one, but quite zen actually. So I was like literally just mourning the death of my father for like months and years even. And there was a monastery, like growing up in Sri Lanka, there are Buddhist monasteries everywhere. It's like maybe it's a tiny one, or maybe it's a big one where all the politicians come, and it's like there's like these really renowned monks, and then there's like the little ones. So there was like a medium sort of sized temple or a monastery really close to where I lived. I I was just kind of even crying while I'm driving, thinking about my dad. And I pulled into the parking lot, and I had never been into this monastery before. I pulled into the driveway to the parking lot. I park my car and I walk into the meditation to the monastery. And as you enter, the first thing you see is a meditation hall. So, and there were a bunch of monks there. This monastery, for whatever reason, attracted a lot of Western monks. So a lot of white guys in orange saffron robes and shaven heads were there. And there was one older guy who was a monk. And we just sort of started talking a little bit. And I said, oh, maybe I'm curious about meditation. I've never done it before. He said, well, take a seat. I have the perfect book for you. Let me just go up to my room and I'll bring it back. So I sat on that cushion and I waited for literally 2 hours. He never came back. And I stood
that was the
up.
lesson.
Yeah. And I stood, holy shit, I just had my first sitting lesson.
That is some skillful means right there, man. I'm gonna bait you with your cognitive mind.
Oh my gosh.
That's
Yeah,
great.
that was amazing. I mean, I don't know really what that maybe that old monk just actually truly forgot, or whether he actually did some kind of crazy wisdom things like, I'm just gonna watch her and see what she's going to do, and whether he was even watching me from afar, who knows. But yes, yeah. And then I got deeply into it after that, like multiple 10-day retreats,
Wow.
40-day silent solitary retreat, not seeing anybody, not talking to anybody, just yeah. So
And this is one of the reasons why I really appreciate Roger Walsh's emphasis these days on karma yoga. Because I think that, particularly in the way he presents it, this is how we sort of reconcile the sort of the duality of having a spiritual practice over here versus the rest of my life over here. This is actually how you take that spiritual practice, whatever it might be, and actually sort of bring it in and fuse it into your actions in the world and your work in the world in a very, very deliberate, conscious and conscientious way. To me, it feels like I think Roger is emphasizing this at just the right time in terms of where the integral project is today. Again, it's sort of a way for us to pull all of these practices together. I mean, Lisa, you and I have talked about several times sort of how special that showing up category is. It's like we do all this practice for waking up, growing up, and cleaning up, all of which is sort of, contained to our own interior psyche. It's very individual, personal based work. But then you reach a point where this begins spilling out. This begins to then affect, like, oh, now I didn't even realize it, but now I'm engaged in a parenting practice, and I'm engaged in a workplace practice. And now it's just, my practice is everywhere. I'm taking this practice, I'm taking my cushion with me wherever I go. And now this is beginning to really saturate into my work. And I'm feeling a little bit less of that division that I previously felt between my spiritual life and my, I guess, everyday life. And I want to point people to Roger Walsh's practice. We have a couple different pieces by him that'll help illuminate this a little bit more. First, on integrallife.com, on the practice page, if you scroll down, you'll find our library of self-directed practices. He has one there called, I think it's called Life as Practice, which is a beautiful introduction to karma yoga. He also just recently did a dialogue with Ken Wilber where they really, really unpack this. And I encourage you guys all to check that out, because it's really, again, I think it's right on schedule. And I think it slips into seamlessly what we're doing here on the Integral Life Practice platform, and sort of, helps people take that next step in terms of pulling this all together into their own lives and their own work in the world.
Nice. Yeah, I actually want to check that out too. I love Roger's work.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. I actually I ground the so I do a ethical power session on the monthly, and we always ground in Roger's definition of what ethics are. What living an ethical life is.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, maybe for the last part, ladies, we've done a lot of talk about practice as homework, as broccoli, as as strengthening our relationship with our own existential lines of development, and getting all morbid with death stuff and all that. I want to talk about some of the fun parts of practice, because that's one of the common refrains with these practice sessions, that people are just legitimately having a freaking blast. Nomali, I want you to tell the story. One of the coolest thing about the practice sessions that we do is the people who show up. And one of the things that makes me really, really happy is one of the people who I love so much, who continues to show up into these practice sessions, is Suzanne Cook Greuter. And Nomali, you have an awesome Suzanne Cook Greuter story I want you to share with the rest of us.
Yes, absolutely. It's a quick story, but I think she showed up. I do a session called Integral Bypassing, or I did my first session, I think last month or something. She showed up to that session. She said she had a clown class just before the integral bypassing session. So she showed up in her clown costume. So she had a super cool clown hat, which had like these little bells hanging on it. Then she had the big red cheeks here. And it was really sweet, because she was also like throughout the session, occasionally when she was sharing something, she'd be saying these really heartfelt, sweet, serious things about integral bypassing or practice. And she had these jingle bells on her hat, like red cheeks. And I can't actually remember if she had the nose as well. I'm drawing a bit of a blank on that, but yeah, just the most adorable thing. But yes, absolutely. I think the funnest part about practice, I actually struggle to practice on my own. As much as an introvert as I am, and an individualist as I am, when it comes to practice, I actually really struggle to find the motivation to do it alone.
Same.
So that's hard. So coming together with other people, if there is the Sangha or the community that is a part of our practice, honestly, there is possibly nothing more fun than that.
Mm,
Simple, joyful fun of people coming together and working on our shit together.
totally. Totally.
Yeah. Or
Well, let me
working
just
on
say,
our greatness together.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
let me just say, Suzanne Kugroiter showing up to an integral bypassing that particular practice, dressed up as a court jester, is like some shamanic level shit right there.
Yes.
Right. And I love that after all these years, our integral elders are still surprising us with clown school and wigs.
Yes.
I think it's great.
Right, I know, yeah. It's so awesome. Yes, not take our lives so seriously.
So Lisa, what have your been experiences with just like the real fun, because again, it's I think so many people relate to practice as this like completely ascending thing. Like again, we're all trying to get from point A to point B, and this is sort of, the quickest route to get there. But there's something about this descending energy of people being together, being joyous, being connected, being free, as you say. Free to be themselves with other people who are like-minded and like-hearted.
Well, I actually love that you were just bringing in authenticity, because I think that that's the piece, right? Like being able to just be who you are in these sessions, it's a real gift.
Mm,
And I don't know that it's raucousness necessarily, but what I would say that I get to see a lot in a lot of the sessions that I lead is people learning to just take themselves less seriously, and,
mm,
and starting to poke fun at, the places where they still need to do some work or to heal. That there's a lightness that actually that you begin to have permission to have around practice. And yeah, I mean, I think that practice can become such a serious affair, right? And there's certain kinds of practices that really lend themselves to that.
mhm,
But most of the practices that I really like to do are in inquiry. And when we start to inquire into aspects of ourselves, and if we can bring that lightness in, there things begin to open up in some really surprising and sweet ways.
mm.
And being able to then turn around and share that with either a small group or in the larger room with other people who are having the same experience, I don't know, it just lends to a lot of laughter and a lot of smiles. We just had our creating conscious friendships women's circle on Sunday. And it was so funny because I always break them into groups of four, and they do something. And when they come back, the expression on these ladies' faces is always really beautiful,
Yeah.
because they all just look so satisfied, because they just had an opportunity to drop into deeper intimacy and deeper connection, to laugh, to share, and to create some bonds that are really magical and special, and that have bridged the gap for a lot of people during this whole period of time when we've been so disconnected from others. So I think that becomes available in these rooms in special ways that are it's kind of unnameable. It's like there's just an essence to being in community in this way that has allowed for some things that are really beautiful for people.
Mm. No, that's
Yeah,
well said.
and if I can also add something that, there's a part of me that right now, there's all these amazing online programs that we can join and sign up for. There's an endless amount of it. But now I notice how I'm sort of holding back a little bit from like signing up for this and that, because I feel like I'm gonna save my money for whenever the next like human meet space thing is going to happen, and it's going to be a blast. And so I'm doing that. I am like missing the meet space just like the rest of the world is probably missing it as well. But this new sort of amazing thing that has happened with a lot of us coming together through Zoom is there is also a beauty to us being able to gather as a community without what gets in the way when we do come together as in meet space, as
Mm,
you do. Like what we look like or what we do. Like, I love that at the Huffman process that I spoke to you about a little while ago, where we work with our parents. Um, um, in that workshop, it's a 7-day workshop. You're with the same people for 7 days. One thing that they're extremely strict about right from the start of the session is from the retreat is nobody's allowed to share with anyone what they do for work.
Hmm.
You do not get to share what you do for work.
I'd go crazy.
It's amazing what liberation people feel
Yeah.
from not knowing what people are doing.
Yeah.
They let you reveal that on the night before the final morning. That's the only time that
Interesting.
people get to say what they do.
Interesting.
Because then we're looking at these incredible people that we have just all been sort of one with. And now we see, oh, that's a Google engineer. Wow, that's a NASA engineer. I had no idea. Oh, and she's a thrift shop worker. And that's the first time that I really realized, especially in sort of in the US, it's an American thing, I think. What we do for a living is often what we are heavily defined with as to
Mhm.
who we are.
Yep.
I think that's a really scary place.
Yep.
Um,
I think that's a pain that everyone feels, and
yeah.
men in particular feel very poignantly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yep.
It's everybody. And or you could also say Enneagram 4s and Enneagram 3s. We do a lot of comparing often.
Mm-hmm.
So when we come together in these practice sessions and we only really know each other mostly through this little box, there's actually a disarming. You don't like, we don't really care about what you look like or what you do, or we don't do too much of that in
Yeah.
the sessions. There's no space for that. So people come as people and human and a little community of wonderful practitioners.
Yep.
Practitioners is the vocation.
Right.
I am a practitioner when I come here, and that's true for everyone. And there's actually a real true gift that has happened through that, of people being able to really explore without all the other added layers of complexity that can happen when we come together as humans in meat space.
That's beautifully said. It's a beautiful point. And I think it gets back to, Lisa, something you said that I think is really, really important, is that at the end of the day, so much of this comes down to finding ways for us to get over ourselves. And I think that this is actually sort of a panacea for what I see, anyways, one of the primary integral level shadows that's out there. And I think that there's a natural sort of teal altitude arrogance that begins to constellate around all of that. And I think that these practices, this way of inviting people to practice, helps them get over that piece of themselves, which probably answers the question I asked earlier. Why is it so hard for people to begin practicing? Because you have to be willing to get over yourself in the first place. And honestly, not most of us aren't. Most of us just kind of aren't. I've been in stages of my life where it's like, no, my work right now can't be getting over like, I need to be somebody before I can be a nobody. I need to build myself up first before I can get over myself. But I think the point we're trying to make is you can actually kind of do both simultaneously, right?
Polarities
You
make
can you
yeah.
can show up to these sessions like fully committed, fully determined, fully present while wearing your clown makeup. And we're sort of inviting everyone to show up to these practices wearing your clown makeup. Right? I mean, maybe not literally if you want to,
Yes, because that's
right?
what Suzanne Cook-Reuter was doing in her clown class.
Exactly. And it's a way of reminding ourselves, like, I'm going to put on this invisible nose right now because this is actually an invitation to get over myself so that I can open myself up to even more of myself and more of each other. Which feels like a very appropriate and important lesson, again, particularly for where the Integral Project is today and where I think we need to continue moving in the years to come.
Yeah, and I love that you brought this up, but what's sparking for me right now is, our egos want to create identity around anything we can grab onto. Like that's what the ego does.
Yep.
And the whole idea of being an integralist, of being able to see the world and see things in this particular way, that's an identity. Like all of these things are identities. And so the work, I think, ultimately is this thing called, how can we loosen the grip of our ego on these various identities, even the identities that we are associating with being second tier. How can we start to loosen the grip of those identities so that actually more becomes possible for us? Yeah.
Yep. You can see the contrast right here, Lisa. Look at my background versus your back. Look how much I want everyone to know about me versus your background and what you want people to know about you. We can see our various levels of ego development at play here. And I think you might be winning the race.
I don't know.
Well, you could also look at it like, look how much I don't want people to know about me.
There's that too. Okay, I like that one better.
Here's the comparison thing. We'll have to start a practice around loosening the hold of comparison, just for Corey to come to, right?
just for practice. I need a lot of practices just for Corey. If you could, Lisa, one of these months you can string together practices for Corey, I would really appreciate that. Ladies, is there anything else that we want to sort of throw into the pot for this episode? Other than reminding people about Nomali's Mother's Day practice, which is coming up on May 8th, 10 o'clock a.m. Pacific time?
Pacific? Yep. It's a 2-hour session. So this is going to be a nice deep drop in and a full body practice. I'm super excited you're doing this, Nomali. Yeah, I'm really excited that this practice is being offered to our community.
Excellent. Thanks for giving me the opportunity.
Yeah.
And thanks for having me today, guys.
Absolutely.
And lady, yes. I always remember, you have to be more politically correct.
just use y'all. You can just get away with anything saying y'all.
Y'all.
Thanks, y'all. No, I want to particularly thank the both of you for making our practice platform as vibrant and as diverse as it really is. I mean, the amount of practices, Lisa, you started the show by saying we have a lot of practice leaders, and they're all absolutely amazing, and they do what they do so well, and they get so deep in these sessions, particularly because a lot of them are leading sessions that repeat every month, so you can sort of build on a theme. And I see the two of you as doing something a little bit different. You're doing that as well, right? You have your sessions that you repeat every month, but you're also constantly throwing novelty onto the platform. You're constantly coming up with new ways to practice, new ways of relating to practice, new sort of facets of ourselves, our identity, our relationships, our being in the world that you are uncovering with all of this just massive diversity of practices that you're bringing to us. And I feel deeply grateful for that. I know our audience feels deeply grateful for that. And I hope you guys continue sort of this innovation that I've been seeing from the two of you in the months to come, because it's been really, really cool to see.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, ladies. Well, thank you so much for your time. Lisa, we've just got another episode in the can. Yeah. And we'll be back again next month. What are we doing? Third Tuesday of the month.
Yeah.
So we'll be back about 4 weeks from now. And I hope you guys can catch us then. In the meantime, go check out Nomali's Mother's Day practice, as well as all the other riches that we have in the platform that are waiting for you.
All right.
Thank you.
I love you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.